name's Tom Privo. I work for Omicron, and one of my responsibilities for the committee under Greg Anderson's meeting planning committee is to try to put together these tutorials, and it's a really cool job because I get to find out all of the new technology that's coming in and all of the work that everyone's doing. Well, anyways, it was 2 meetings ago, Nick, that we were sharing a cab back to the airport, and so he was freshly off of sitting through one of these tutorials, and he said, you know, we got talking about it. He was just finishing his PhD. I'm sure he's going to explain more about what he's doing, but his PhD thesis was about brain drain in the industry, and it's amazing actually now when I look out in the audience in the last probably 5 years that we have less gray hair out there than we used to have, so which is really good and positive as far as the quality of our meetings and the fact that we can continue to attract new younger folks and make it interesting enough for you guys to sit through this. But it's a significant issue which you'll hear about, and there's going to be, you know, probably in the next 5 years, half of you won't be here because you're going to be retiring and moving on. So with that, I'm going to move it over to Nick. I'm not going to talk about their CVs. You can see them. They were posted on the website. The first presenter is going to be Nick Perjanik from Wyden. And then the second presenter is Alan Vanderbilt from, you're now with New Mexico Public Service Company of New Mexico. So with that, I'll pass it to Nick. I guess you're going to start. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, check my mic. Am I good? Can you hear me in the back? No. Green light's on? I'm okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thanks, Tom. As Tom had said, we were in a van going to the airport, and I was talking to Tom about what I was studying in school, and I asked him, I tried to figure out whether it was an important topic, and 3 other people were in the van, and so Tom asked each of them whether they were interested in the topic, and they said they were. So every other IEEE meeting I've been to for the last 4.5 years, I come to the meetings, I go back to my room, and I read articles, and I work on my dissertation. This is the first time that I've been able to come to an IEEE meeting and actually drink beer. So I appreciate that I'm done, and I get to share what I've done with you. Just real brief background, I'm a chemist by education, but I went back and got my PhD in applied management and decision sciences. And I gave a paper on decision sciences at the NEDA conference. And one of the things that I see in my field is more and more users, more and more of our clients who come to us at Wyden in the laboratory side and are asking us to make their decisions for them on what they should do for their transformers, how to interpret the results and help them make the decisions. And I'm seeing a lot of utilities that I've worked with since '87 where those senior engineers, 30 plus years, are retiring. And the people that are coming in to replace them don't have that experience that the senior retiring engineers had. So the applied management side of my education thought, you know what, I want to study what are utilities doing in terms of brain drain and the retirement of engineers. So I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes. I'm going to introduce the topic to you, give you a little bit of background and kind of the direction and why I study this. Al Bain will come up and talk for about 20 minutes on what public service in New Mexico has done. So I have the agenda in front of you here. And then I'll come back and talk to you about my study and what I found. What are utilities doing in regard to their retiring engineers and the loss of that knowledge? I'm going to walk around, so I'm sorry if the people in the back can't see me, but I don't sit very well, so I need to walk. We'll probably finish a few minutes early, and I'll leave it 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, please ask them. So a little bit of background here. We talk about knowledge management. Some of you are familiar with the word. In 1990s, it was really kind of the cool thing to talk about was how do we manage knowledge? How do we treat it as an asset, as an intellectual asset? as something that needs to be managed. It kind of slowed down in the 2000s, but it's coming back, and one of the big parts of knowledge management is all the data and all the information that we're being bombarded with in our utilities, in our jobs, data analytics, and how do we manage that information. But lost in some of that was the focus on the employee, focus on the knowledge of the employee. So as I go through the presentation and some slides later, I talk about some of the systems that a lot of you are probably using SharePoint or Lotus Notes and some of the IT-related tools that are out there, but really looking at that knowledge that's inside the head of our people. So if you look here at the slide, we're all familiar with data, right? Numbers. Putting that data together into a report or something that provides us with information. But what we're really looking at is knowledge. If you have that information in front of you, how do you make that? What do you do with it? How do you make a decision, right? How do you put it into action? So when we talk about knowledge management, we're really talking about taking our data, taking our information, and doing something with it. Most of us that are in substation maintenance or testing or manufacturing, we really get paid to make decisions, right? And with that decision, we have to be able to base it on some data, some information. We have to be able to stand behind it. And that's kind of one of the challenges that we have as we move forward. If you look at this next slide, I want to really define what we mean by tacit knowledge. A lot of us are familiar with the word knowledge. There's a million different definitions for it. But there's two types that we're going to really talk about. One is explicit knowledge, okay? Explicit knowledge is that knowledge that we have that we can document. So as a group, we all come together in IEEE on a consensus basis. We're trying to take the knowledge of the industry, everybody from the manufacturers, the service companies, insurance companies, users, labs, we're all coming together and forming a consensus document, okay? That is capturing that explicit knowledge. But we know, for example, to take the IEEE C57106, I think it is, document on oil quality testing. And it says that if you have a less than 69 kV unit, you can have up to 35 parts per million of water in it and be acceptable for continued use. Okay? Well, that's in the guide, but we know that there's a lot more to that, right? We know that it depends on the temperature of the transformer, right? A cold temperature, a warm temperature. We know that contaminants that get in the oil can change that value. So we have to have that knowledge behind the guides. And we're seeing some newer engineers coming out of school, coming in, calling me, and saying, my part per million is 36 parts per million of moisture. I need to take the unit out of service. Because they're using the IEEE guidelines as hard and fast numbers, right? Instead of a guide and understanding what's behind them. So that knowledge that we have that's written or stored and produces guidelines, we're going to refer to that as explicit knowledge. The next knowledge that we really want to focus on is tacit knowledge. It's that knowledge that we have that's really experience-based knowledge. So for those of you that have been in the industry, you can walk into a substation. Sometimes you can look at a transformer, you can hear it, you can touch it, and you just know something's going on, right? How do you document that? It's very difficult. How do you document, how to hit a fastball, how to ride a bike, right? Very difficult. You have to experience it. And that's the knowledge that we're really interested in with those of you in the room and the industry that are close to retirement. And ultimately, that's the experience, that's the knowledge that we make decisions based on. Okay? So as we go through this presentation and you hear the word tacit knowledge, think of it as know-how, right? The know-how to do something, or the experience-based knowledge. That's what we really want to talk about. A lot of information on here, but the knowledge topology that we're going to talk about, I just explained explicit and tacit knowledge for you. It really exists along a continuum. Okay? Some of our knowledge is completely explicit, some of it completely tacit. One of the challenges is, and we think this all the time, is how do we capture that tacit knowledge we have in our head, and how do we document it? Right? How do we get these expert systems designed to really capture that tacit knowledge? And that's where it becomes a little more difficult. Sometimes moving that tacit knowledge and making it explicit, you're going to lose what makes it valuable, what makes it tacit. So there is some knowledge that we just can't document, okay? And that's what we're going to focus on. Knowledge management, leadership, and culture. These are important concepts for understanding what I'm going to present today. Knowledge management, you can kind of see here, it's the identification, the capturing, the storing, the transfer, and making knowledge accessible, right? You want the right knowledge at the right time to go to the right person and make it accessible and so forth. In terms of leadership, you can see here, we really want to make sure, and this is one of the issues that goes on in private organizations and utilities, we want to align our knowledge management programs with our business strategies. And what I mean by that is, you have an organization that goes out and says, hey, we're experts, we're your consultants, we're your key person to help you solve your problem. But then your knowledge management programs, what you implement in your organization, don't focus on tacit knowledge, right? So you end up with this organization that has a great reputation, your top 2 or 3 engineers leave, and you've lost, or you don't have that knowledge base that you really need to do what you need to do. And that's one of the things we'll cover today. The other thing is organizational structure. In my study, and I'll talk more about this a little bit later, there's organizations that physically keep their senior engineers away from their new engineers. Okay? There's organizations, utilities that have bowl pits, right? Small, low-walled cubicles to keep people talking to each other, water cooler talk. But there's other utilities that physically have walls where their senior engineers are in one place and their junior engineers are somewhere else. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. The other topic to understand is the idea of knowledge hoarding. And you'll see that we've all heard that knowledge is power, right? But for humans, and this kind of changes culturally in Germany and Asia and the US, we value and we look at knowledge differently. And part of that is, who owns it, right? If you come to this meeting and you learn something, it's yours, right? You hold it in, you own it. But whose knowledge is it really? Is it yours or is it the organization you work for? A lot of us, I've done it myself, I know something really important. It makes me valuable to my company. They're not going to fire me because I'm the only guy in my company that knows it. That doesn't always work, right? But, so the knowledge hoarding becomes an important part in this discussion. Is the person, or are the people that own the data, that have it, are they willing to share it? Okay? And that becomes important when we start talking about some of these strategies to help share the information. So just go through a quick list here. The number of people worldwide are expected to double in the next 40 years to 6 billion. Right? Imagine the sewer systems, the water systems, the power systems, the things that we need to do to keep up with that. First baby boomers turned 65 in 2011. 10,000 of you, I'm not a baby boomer, are retiring per day. Okay, significant numbers. Half of the industry workforce expected to retire in the next 5 to 10 years. Scary part is look at the date on that, 2011. So people are retiring en masse. Operational continuity poses a threat to organizations. There's a lack of high-tech and electrical utility empirical research on what to do to capture that. There's an aging inventory of large power transformers, greater than 40 years, I think it's 42 years now, or more. And we need knowledge to maintain that equipment. There's an increasing dependence on outside consultants to make those decisions that, as a utility or as a user, you need to be able to make. It's a specifically challenging issue for engineers and scientists. Employment growth is expected at 4% for power generation, distribution, and transmission from 2012 to 2022. That's versus 11% for all engineers. So there's a little bit of a challenge of bringing in electrical engineers into our industry, or into this power distribution and transmission industry. There's an increased need for capturing this information. And if you look at the dates here, and they're off maybe a year or two, you got baby boomers, right? Numbers sometimes 1939 to 64, but post-war, right? They're no longer considered old. They're considered senior, right? All of you are prolonging your retirements, right? If you're a Gen X, from 65 to 78, that's why I call myself, I refer to you as you, because I was born in February of 65, so I am not old. My kids think of me as a cool Gen X dad. Okay, maybe not. Gen Y, 79 to 95. Millennials, right? As you go from Gen X, these are people that were kind of individualists. They're adaptable to environments. Millennials, they were raised on the internet. Right? We're going to have fun managing them. And then you get this Gen Z. You know, I mean, there are already 23 million of them and growing. There's 82 million baby boomers in the U.S. 41 million Gen X. So if you look at the numbers, they're moving. The curve is shifting to the right. We're starting to see ads for knowledge-based jobs. This was on LinkedIn, PG&E, hiring a knowledge transfer program manager. So these are things that are being seen in the industry. These are topics that are being talked about. So here's my research question. What strategies are electrical utilities implementing to capture the tacit knowledge of retiring electrical engineers and technical personnel? It's what I wanted to know. I just give this slide to give you a little bit of perspective of maybe how to look at this topic. So this was the lens, the theoretical lens that I looked at the problem. Knowledge creation theory, it's really designed, how is knowledge created, right? Is knowledge created on the individual and then transferred to another individual? And how do we transfer that to an organization? And then how does the organization create what we call organizational memories and share that back with their other employees? So we really look at this cycle of how is knowledge created. So it's important to understand how knowledge is created in an organization. Resource-based theory. The old idea was that we wanted to have a competitive advantage based on our resources. And a lot of those resources were physical, right? Our equipment, our location, our technology. But really, resource-based theory says, look at all of your assets, right? Look at your intellectual assets, your physical and intangible assets, and how do you leverage those? So obviously, when we're talking about knowledge, we're talking about an organizational intangible asset that we need to leverage as a resource. And the last way I looked at this was as an organizational learning theory. How do organizations learn? Do we do something, fail at it, and then repeat it 5 years later? Because I can tell you with the brain drain, where the senior engineers and senior personnel that are retiring, we're going to be repeating the same errors that they did 25 years ago. So how do you capture that? It's called double loop learning. But how do we go back and capture that knowledge so we're not just repeating the same mistakes? So understanding where an organization stands and what risks exist, some organizations in the literature. Duke Energy, for example, did a study back in 2008. They went through, these are documented, these are in the literature. They looked at they realized that they had a knowledge loss issue. They did a study in 2008 where they looked at what were they doing in their organization to capture that knowledge before it left. Using that same foundation, TVA did the same study in their nuclear field. Nuclear engineers. Not a lot of engineers are going into the nuclear field, right? They realized that they had a problem. So they came in and did the same analysis that Duke did at TVA, and it was through the IEEE organization. NASA's done it. Here's a slide. What NASA did is they looked at where their knowledge was, and over on the right, it's hard to see, but each of these locations, they said, what systems, what strategies do we have in place in each of these areas to capture that knowledge, okay? And some of these strategies are the same strategies that we use. But they were obviously really concerned in capturing and maintaining that information. So with that, what I want to do is I'll have Alvain come up, Alvain Vanderwalt. I asked Alvain to present because I really wanted you to give you an insight into what a utility is actually dealing with. So when I go through my study, I'll explain the study and the results I got. But Alvain's organization was a company that was doing some really cool things. So with that, I'll hand it over to Alvain.
Thanks, Nick. Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Alvain Vanderwalt. I'm currently the director of...
He's got a mic.
You got a mic? But I
Can't
hear
go
you.
to that.
Is your mic on?
on your belt.
On your belt.
Yeah, I don't think you can go.
There we go. So I'm Alvain Vanderwalt. I'm currently the director of protection control engineering and substation leader operations for the public service company in Mexico. And as Nick said, I would like to share with you the efforts that we've done over the last few years to address this problem of tacit brain drain and knowledge capture of retiring and leading employees. So a little bit background about PNM itself as a company. We're a regulated electric holding company serving customers in New Mexico and Texas through two regulated utilities, one in New Mexico and one in Texas. Those companies called PNM and Texas Municipal Power Company. PNM's generation portfolio includes about 2,700 to 2,800 megawatts of the combination of nuclear, thermal, coal, gas, wind, geothermal, and solar generation spread throughout various locations in the southwest. As you can see on that map, the little dots represent the different types of generation. In New Mexico, PNM has about 516,000 customers. That includes the largest city in New Mexico, which is Albuquerque. And then TNMP, our sister company in Texas, spread throughout small pockets all over Texas. They have about 243,000 retail customers. So, public service company in Mexico, at the holding level, we have about 1,830 employees, of which the majority of them reside in New Mexico, in the Albuquerque area. And as I mentioned before, there's two operating companies, PNM and Texas Municipal Power. So PNM is the largest utility in New Mexico, although in terms of employees, that does not put us in the top 10 employers in the state. New Mexico has about 2 million employees. So certainly there are some bigger companies there, and I'll talk about them in a minute, but PNM is not one of the top employers. The business unit that I work in, the Mexico operations, has about 491 employees, from the VP down to the craft workers. And that operations group is made up of the following primary functions in terms of departments. We have planning in there, engineering, construction, system operations, substation operations and maintenance, T&D lines operations and maintenance, and the meter department. All of these programs that I'm going to be talking about basically reside in the Mexico operations, and as such, that's why I'm representing that portion of the business. However, most of these programs do require corporate HR participation. So what are the labor issues that PNM faces as a company? As far as our aging workforce, we probably look different from most of the other utilities, with about 40% of our employees or workforce eligible for retirement in the next 5 years or so. The Mexican labor market is somewhat complex and somewhat unique in some sense, that there are not many talented and skilled employees available in the market. And that's made worse by the fact that New Mexico is not exactly a hotbed of people wanting to move there and say, yeah, I want to move to New Mexico. So that doesn't help us in the bigger scheme of things. An additional problem that we suffer with in PNM specifically is that our employees many of them are in 1B roles. By that I mean they're in a position that there's not necessarily someone in the pipeline behind them to replace them should they retire or leave. And there's therefore, when they do leave, they leave a big gap. And that's probably typical for most utilities or any organization that is staffed extremely lean, and there's a model of just simply not having enough people around. I guess all of us can relate to that in one way or another. So lastly, the few tech companies around typically pay a lot more than PNM does, which makes it harder for us to attract and or retain talented employees. These companies include Sandia National Labs, Los Alamos National Lab, Intel, and so on. So what is PNM doing about this? Over the last few years, we've introduced several initiatives related to employee development and retention. And specifically, also more recently, we introduced some initiatives aimed at capturing employees' knowledge and critical information they have before they leave our doors for greener pastures, whether that may be for retirement or just to take up another job. I'll be talking just briefly about these programs, and some of them will be covered in more detail later on. The first one is an intern program, and so the first two programs there are basically helping us attract talent. So we have an intern program which is in two portions. There is a summer intern program that we work with our local utilities and colleges to provide opportunities for engineering students to come and work in our business. And then we have another program specifically aimed at the Native American student population. The second program that is about 3 years ongoing now, and it's very, very successful, is what we call our rotational engineer program. And that is a program aimed at new or recently graduated engineers, and that provides them with a 2-year rotation through the various departments listed, such as planning, generation, system operations, engineering, and so forth. And then a 2-year program with 4 rotations, 4 6-month rotations each. And the idea is to give them a pretty good idea and exposure to the various departments and the types of jobs that they may come across, to give them a broader background that's more useful to the company as well. And then lastly, upon completion of that program, we do try to place them in the department of their preference within the constraints that the business has at the time. So a fairly new initiative that we're currently working on, it's still in the development stage, is what we call our Engineering Review Board, which is basically a program aimed to provide guidance specifically to engineers for their career development. And as such, this board also developed minimum and recommended criteria for promotions within each of the engineering tiers as engineers grow through his career. In conjunction with that Engineering Review Board, we also have a technical staff development program, which is essentially the same board with a different function or different scope, and that it includes not just engineers from all technical jobs that we may think that can benefit from career development. And both those programs run in conjunction, and they both provide guidance and opportunities for both a technical track as well as a management track. And the employees can typically select how much they want to get involved in either or both of those tracks within the time that they're available. Then in the last year, we've introduced a program specifically aimed at retiring employees or employees that have announced their departure from the company. This program utilizes a third-party company called Transition Path, and it's aimed specifically at capturing that knowledge that Nick was referring to as much knowledge as possible from the retiring employee before they leave. It goes beyond and deeper than the typical job description or performance appraisal type of information that may exist in the company. And I'll talk more about that program in my next few slides. And in the last two programs, to facilitate some of this knowledge transfer and to make it a smoother onboarding and transition program, we've created two programs one is called the Dual Incumbency Program, and the other is called the Phased Retirement Program. And I'll talk more about both of those later on as well. So we know that most employees gather a wealth of information and knowledge during their careers. And a lot of that knowledge is not documented or captured anywhere. In their job descriptions, in performance reviews, procedures they may have written. During their career they generate a lot of documents, but none of that specifically captures what went into creating those documents, the knowledge that's needed to do that. So the information that we really need to capture then is called the tacit or institutional knowledge. And that information is intuitive and developed through experience. So it's very hard to describe and transfer because it relates to the employee's inherent skills, it relates to his experiences, insights, and observations that he gained over time. It captures or addresses the unique learning that he gained related to a particular job, and then how he internalized that information and developed workarounds or shortcuts to better deal with that workload. So this information is the type of information that we try to capture with our Transition Path program. So how did we approach this? What did we do? The first thing we did is we identified key and critical employees. And those are the employees that we said that have critical knowledge or are in critical roles that need specialist knowledge or business critical knowledge that cannot be easily replaced or found in the labor market. And initially, we started by identifying employees in the company that are, or in our business unit, that are age 59 and older. In other words, in the next 5 years of retirement, or close to retirement for the typical employee. However, subsequent to that, we realized that really limits us in terms of there are many employees that actually are not in retirement age, but still possess critical knowledge, and that could depart at any time, and then you lose that same information that they have as well. So we expanded that to include more critical employees, meeting the criteria of having critical knowledge, and maybe with a slightly higher burden of proof to say that they are at flag of risk. The next thing we did is to divide those employees, the list of employees, into 3 different tiers. And those tiers are basically just to make it a more manageable and practical program. And so tier 1 includes those that their departure would cause an imminent and significant operational exposure. So typically those would be employees that are within a year or 2 away from retirement, or that have announced they might retire next week or leave for different employment. Tier 2 is employees that meet the same critical criteria, but their departure is a little bit further off, maybe 3 or 4 years from retirement, or maybe not as key to the organization as some of the others. And then our tier 3 employees are those that we call our nuclear radar. So those are that they meet the criteria of critical knowledge, but they are not near retirement, or 5 years or more away from retirement. So we then brought in a company called Transition Path, and they do a process they refer to as broad scope. And that is basically a 90-minute interview that they have, a structured interview with each of the employees in this tier 1 candidate list. That is an organized way of capturing the critical job elements and activities that the employee is involved with. But the big difference is as seen from the employee's perspective, rather than from management or HR's perspective. So once the broad scope interview is completed and we get the documentation back, they provide us with a document that this is a chart that's deliberately so very much eye candy. Believe me, even if you print this out, you still can't read it. So the purpose of the slide is just to give you a visual perspective of the employee's job, how technically complex that the different activities may be, and how much there is to it. The document then is obviously has a more detailed breakdown of each of these different job categories and tasks, and the different sub-tasks that go with that. The document goes into much more detail on what that is, again, as seen from the employee's perspective. So once management has reviewed that document, they then have the option to go to step 2 of the broad scope process, which is called the detailed discovery. And that has the benefit of being a much more targeted interview. It's set up as another one-on-one interview with the employee. And it has, you can select that to be, if needed, if you need to do that, you can perform a focus in on a particular job function or task, or more than one function. It's really up to where the need is to get more information from. And again, the purpose of that would be to gather the key insights, the unique skills, the knowledge and experience that the employee is gaining as it relates to doing their job. So what does the broad scope process do in general? Well, as I said, it allows the employee the organization to visualize an entire job function from the perspective of the employee. The focus is now in the employee executes his job and identify and document those specific skills and knowledge that the employee thinks is needed to succeed in their job. During that process, then it also discovers things or captures things such as mission critical activities that has a significant negative impact to the business if the employee should leave if it's not executed well. It identifies activities or responsibilities that the employee is concerned over, or that he has expressed caution over, saying that this might be a problem that the company need to focus on. It identifies specialist functions requiring specific knowledge, or that requires the deployment of intellectual property. And lastly, then, it identifies the activities and functions that can either be enhanced or possibly eliminated from the program. So as the employee comes up with things that management deems not necessary in the bigger, broader term of the job, that that can then be easier identified and eliminated. Or on the other hand, some functions can be enhanced or they need to be improved. So in summary then, and this is quite a high-candy chart as well, I'll try to go through as quickly as I can. The broad scope process for PDM addressed the following concerns. First of all, it captures the loss of employee knowledge, which is the primary objective. And secondly, it allows for more productive and targeted recruitment of the replacement employee, because we know exactly what skills we need to go and find in the market. It allows for proactive succession planning. It can lead, as I mentioned, to productivity improvements or cost reductions by either eliminating or adding new functions. It can lead to result in business reengineering efforts as well, to streamline jobs and things like that. It also facilitates a process to manage high potential talent in the organization by identifying those through this key and critical list. And lastly, it improves the leadership effectiveness through the identification of labor-related priorities and areas that they may need to put more attention on. So that's the broad scope process in a nutshell. And for those of you that have interest in finding out more about that company or the broad scope, just talk to me afterwards. I do have some information I can provide on that, obviously not included here. So then I also mentioned that we have two other programs that we use to facilitate this transition process once we know somebody is leaving and to capture this knowledge. It's effectively aimed at buying the organization some time to deal with this transition process. Now obviously in many cases employees that quit give a week or two notice, and there's not too much we can do about that. By identifying them proactively, at least we can aim to capture some of that information. But in the bigger scheme of things, most of these programs are more aimed at the retiring employee. So the first of these is a dual incumbency program, in which a process was set up with our HR department that when employees announce their imminent retirement or up to a year in the future, that allows us to move them into a temporary position. I'm sure most of the organizations, as our organization, has a fixed headcount. We can't just hire to replace people whenever it suits us. We have to stay within our allowed limits for corporate. So we work hard to create this, what's called the dual incumbent process. And those employees, then the retiring employee is moved into a temporary position, which just allows us then to, as a result of the original position being vacated, to go out and hire and get somebody onboarded, hopefully before the employee actually leaves, and to allow for some overlap and training during that time. There are some limitations to that, of course. In our company, the way we do it is part of this, as a result of this, and also just in general, we have, as I said, about 490 employees in our business unit. And when somebody leaves or retires, we don't automatically just replace that position one-on-one. We do go, once a month, the management gets together, and we use the vacant positions that we have in terms of the headcount to fill wherever the biggest need is in the business at that time. So meaning the guy that retires or leaves in this department will not necessarily be replaced, but we'll use that vacant position to fill another more urgent need somewhere else. The second initiative that we use is called phased retirement. And that also has a limited audience, and I'll explain that more. And those are 14 critical employees who have indicated their desire to retire are given the opportunity to go to a part-time schedule. So they are moved into a hourly pay rate so that they can reduce their work hours down to as low as 20 hours instead of the usual 40-hour work week. And then the benefit to them is that they keep their full health care and pension benefits. They're still considered active full-time employees. Obviously, the biggest drawback to that is it's only really accessible and available to those people who can get away with working 20 hours with reduced income. If they need the money, then obviously that's not going to work. So, in summary, what we've learned through this process, and what I'd like to share with you all, the recommendation that our company came to and we can pass on, is that thanks to the increased rate of departure of the baby boomer generation, as Nick had mentioned, and I was born in June '64, so I guess technically that makes me a baby boomer. But it means, in practice, it means that year when the Social Security and all that kind of stuff is completely done, that's when I retire. So this is important to me as well. So that's maybe too much leading. Organizations are facing higher and higher rates of turnover, with replacement workforce less likely to look for career-long employment, or especially with one employer. So the organization should plan for that, be prepared for that, have procedures and processes in place to help you through that change in the business place. The second thing is multi-decade employees or long-term employees know where the challenges are in the business. They know what the business needs to succeed. So leverage that. Help capture that information and pass it on to the newcomers coming in so that your business can be more successful. Some of the programs that I mentioned, such as the dual incumbency and the phase retirement, are aimed at onboarding post long-term employees, and they must focus on reducing the unexpected turnover so that we have a strategy to deal with that when it does happen. That should also then lastly requires us to deal with allow our managers and our first-line supervisors to be aware of these programs. So we actively educate them about these and even explain to them how the programs work so that they are aware of these initiatives and can recognize in due time when they need those and not when it's too late, the guy's gone, I never knew about I could do this. So those are the three lessons that we learned, or the lessons that we took away from this effort. And with that, I'm not going to take questions right now, unless you have an urgent question. I'll just pass it back to Nick, and we'll take questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay, I'm back. Okay, so what I want to do right now is give a real brief overview of my study, and then go right into kind of what I found. So the participants for my study, originally I thought I would interview 3 to 5 utilities. But I increased that because I needed more data. I ended up interviewing 7 different utilities in the U.S., 9 different participants. These organizations were chosen predominantly because they've shown a commitment to investing in the industry. So they are either members of IEEE or ASTM or IEC, but they're U.S.-based organizations. And I also did a strategy called triangulation. So I wanted to interview the senior engineers, and a few of these senior engineers, 35, 37 years with their companies in the industry. But I wanted to make sure that what they were telling me was real. It wasn't just a viewpoint. So I also interviewed a few people in human resources and workforce planning to triangulate, to ensure that what I was hearing was actually representative out there. I will share in a few of my interviews, they were recorded. I heard the comment, please don't say this part, or please don't share this part. So there's actually information I gathered during my interviews that I couldn't use in my study, but I do think that I was getting representative feedback from those that I was interviewing about the situations in the organization. You can see here I asked open-ended, semi-structured questions, about 21 guiding questions to run the interview. I recorded and transcribed the interviews word for word. I wish I was a faster typist. Sent that information back to the participants. They corrected any errors or anything that I had. They sent it back. And then I used a program called In Vivo to do some content analysis, so keyword searches, and look for themes and look for conflicting viewpoints on things to really help out my data. I looked at 3 things in my study. One, I had questions on the culture and leadership. It was very important when you're understanding what the utilities were doing to capture that knowledge, that I understood the culture and the environment that they were working in. So I asked questions on that. I also asked questions on their knowledge management programs, and how does the organization view data or knowledge? Is it something that's in the corporate document that we value our employees, we value knowledge, but then they don't put things in place to demonstrate, walk the walk or walk the talk? So I really was interested in understanding the context of what strategies they were doing. And then lastly, I asked questions directly around what strategies they were doing. I did use information from the previous Duke study, from TVA, from other industries, to get an idea of what I was expecting. So I was able to kind of guide that interview through different things. But I also asked, are there anything else going on? And what I did find is during the interviews, some of the participants realized that they were actually doing some things they didn't know that were knowledge management type programs. So good conversations in these interviews. So before I go through the 10 strategies I found, a couple emerging themes. In terms of culture and leadership, there really was a lack of embedded company-wide programs that recognized or incentivized the knowledge sharing. Okay, I'll go through some of them that were there, but a lot of these weren't company-wide. They were doing them in certain departments, but not necessarily organizational-wide. Knowledge, again, was valued by senior leadership, but really the view of that, the perception of that by those engineers I interviewed was not necessarily in agreement with that. All right? They didn't really perceive that the knowledge they had was valued. It was used in, knowledge sharing was used in 4 of the 7 organizations in performance evaluations, job descriptions. So some of the utilities said, hey, look, for job sharing and mentoring and training is a component of your job. And we're actually evaluated on that in their job performance evaluations. Physical challenges with the integration and shielding of performance, of engineers. Again, some engineers, occasionally there's that engineer that's been there 35 years, and there is a strategic decision to not have that engineer talk to the new engineers. Okay? Maybe there's some bad habits or something there, they don't want to share that. If they don't want that person, I don't know, infecting the new engineer, I don't know what other terminology to use. But a lot of it had to do with the structure. So I physically asked, are the newer engineers near the senior engineers? Is there a concerted effort to bring that knowledge together? Then in terms of knowledge management, again, most of the existing programs were predominantly dealing with the explicit knowledge, right? A lot of the utilities I interviewed had great systems of how to store data, how to store information, right? Where are the documents? Where do I need to go find that document? But again, these are explicit knowledge-based programs. And again, knowledge management implementations, upper management decided what software you were going to use, whether you use SharePoint or Lotus Notes or what it was. And in most cases, the employees were forced to use whatever systems were in place. And then in terms of implementation, implemented capture strategies, I found 10. So for the next 15, 20 minutes here, I'm going to go through these 10 programs with you. So the first is the most recognized is formal and informal onboarding mentorships, okay, and apprenticeships. So when we say onboarding, it's when they bring on a new person, how do they train them? So it's the oldest and the most common strategy used. It really, the idea of apprenticeship is really to have the mentee, right, start to think like the mentor, right? Take that knowledge that they're getting and start to form those pathways so that the new employee is thinking like the older employee, right? And the concept's called thinking out loud. It allows, really based on relationship, trust, and incentive-based programs. So what I mean by that is, you know, to go to a 30-year experienced senior engineer and say, we want you to train the new engineer, there's some obstacles with that. One, do they get to choose? Does a mentor get to choose if they're involved in that process? Are they forced to do the training? Is it something that's going to take them away from the work they really need to get done? Right? Is there trust between the mentor and the mentee? And is there some incentive? Is it in the performance evaluation? Is it in their job description? Are they going to get recognized for that? These are some issues that were brought up. There's formal and informal programs. Most of the organizations have a formal documented procedure. So they know that when a new engineer comes in, just like at P&M, they go through a rotation, they spend a certain amount of time with different departments, with different engineers. Most of those are documented procedures. And again, there's some physical and leadership-driven challenges. Those still exist in terms of, again, linking up the right person, both physically, by office, by structure of the organization, and who's going to be involved in that. I love this picture. I just had to throw it in. The second are informal and informal offboarding, okay, mentorship programs. So when someone's going to leave, is there a mentorship program when they leave? Right? It's a different idea. Instead of taking a senior engineer and let's train the new engineer when they get on. But is there a program designed that when that senior engineer is leaving, to capture that and transfer that knowledge. And Alvin gave a great example of what PMM is doing in terms of trying to capture that. But it was really an underutilized strategy. It was identified, but it was underutilized in most organizations. Challenges exist, as Alvin said, in terms of headcount constraints and redundancy, limited financial resources, and quite often you just don't know when people are retiring. So in some organizations, when I talk to their HR department, they can't ask when someone's retiring. They can't have that conversation. Some organizations know years ahead, right? And quite often you say, when you're retiring, oh, I think at the end of the year. They get close to the end of the year, well, next summer, right? It keeps going out there. So there's some challenges around setting up these programs. And as Alvin said, being one deep, really only having one person that knows something is a challenge in these situations. And then what we call leveraging organizational citizenship behavior. That's the ability of the employee to go beyond their job, right? So you're an engineer, and you're working, you're doing your job. Is the employee willing to go beyond to really help the organization capture that knowledge? So is that behavior there, and is that something that you can do? Organizations, again, if you allow that senior engineer to be involved in choosing the mentee, there's some incentive for that person to do that. These are some of the issues that came up under this. The third is formal and informal training programs. Really an integral part of knowledge sharing. Okay? Most of these are formal meetings. Training, they're routine, they're done weekly, some are done monthly. Some of the utilities I interviewed have internal training centers, they have schools, they have universities, and a lot of them actually utilize their senior engineers to run those training courses. So to give that, again, to give that interpersonal connection, that face-to-face training that's needed to share this information. Additional socially based strategies include industry events. Right? So everybody in this room that's come to IEEE, you're learning things, you're out in the hallway, you're having drinks, you're telling stories to each other, you're learning from each other. Utilities, about half of the utilities I interviewed require their attendees who come to this to go back and share the knowledge that they've learned. Okay? Whether that's with a written trip report, or whether that's getting up and doing one of these presentations in front of their employees. But they're required to share that knowledge. So I think that's an important way of sharing that knowledge that we learn at these organizations. Number fourth strategy is lessons learned. Practice, use it 5 of the 7 utilities. But I thought it was interesting, two of the utilities made comments that their lessons learned programs were being run predominantly by their older employees, and they were based in the military background. So there was also a fear that strategy could go away as the senior engineers that have potentially military backgrounds leave their organization. But it was noted too that these lessons learned are very valuable for sharing that knowledge, both on positive lessons learned and negative. Right? You have a project that goes extremely well, quite often once that project's done, it's done. Right? But when that project goes wrong and something's negative, it lingers. Right? There's corporate memory with that. So having the lessons learned to learn what happened, what was positive, what was negative, and sharing that with each other is huge and noted by the utilities. The fifth strategy was what we call communities of practice. Okay? Virtual, physical, informal, formal, doesn't matter. But they're groups that have similar interests that get together and share that knowledge. Okay? It can be problems, it can be organizational topics, it can be concerns. Okay? These are groups within this area here. After this meeting, there might be 4 or 5 of you that get together and discuss something on the side, right? It may not be a formal organization. It may be an informal, but there's a lot of sharing that goes on there. And these may be facilitated by Shareware, Lotus Notes, and some of the other programs. Some of the programs now that are keeping blogs and things that are keeping that data are storing that data for future use. These involve governance and oversight, and the research goes both ways on this. Sometimes your formal groups need a leader to run them, But sometimes they don't. Sometimes these communities run much better when there's not a leader. The information flows better, right? And the interesting thing is sometimes in these communities, you have sub-communities. So even though we all get together at IEEE to share knowledge and to do things, within these groups are small communities, right? They get together, the same 10 people get together and share their knowledge. That can happen within these utilities as well. And it was some of the utilities I talked to that were multi-state really used this concept of communities of practice to share knowledge within the states, to get people in similar jobs working together, electronically, video conferencing, whatever way they want to do it. Storytelling, I'll say this, but Dr. Jacob, Freddie Jacob was my mentor. I worked for him back in '87. I've heard Freddie's stories so many times I can finish them after the second word, okay? But I've learned a lot from Dr. Jacob. Our stories really help us learn, put the information in context. So as you see here, they're detailed narrative that enables a listener to create their own tacit knowledge. So when someone's telling you a story, you're actually kind of visualizing it in your head, right? You're thinking about what they're saying, you're interpreting it into your own way of thinking. And they actually say that when you hear a story, you're going to retain that information about 20 times more when you hear it in a story format. So I've had meetings, research has shown, great way to start a meeting is to ask somebody in your meeting to tell a story of something. If you're having a meeting about quality control, ask somebody in the room, hey, tell us something that happened with your client, right? Start that storytelling. It's very valuable. Okay? It's a way of sharing that knowledge, and the person that's sharing that story can put it in context so that other people can then start to understand it. And again, this strategy was used at 5 to 7 of the utilities. And actually 2 of them had formal storytelling programs. I thought that was very interesting. And again, it provides context for visualization and personalizes that data. So I'll give you a quick example. At Weidman, we were going to hire a new engineer. And I had an engineer come in, and he was from Italy, about this tall. And I said to him, I said, I'm going to test you first before we hire you as an engineer. Bart, you were there. And the engineer said to me, well, what's the test? I said, well, I gave him a piece of chalk. And I said, go to this chalkboard, and I want you to draw the number 9 without making the numbers. He looked at me and said, okay. He took the chalk and went over and drew 3 big trees. Said, Nick, there's a 9. Said, how's that 9? He said, well, Nick, it's a tree plus a tree plus a tree. That's a 9. And I said, okay, my Italian friend, make it 99. My little Italian friend looked at me and said, oh. Took his thumb and rubbed each of the trees. He goes, Nick, there's a 99. I said, how's that 99? Well, Nick, it's a dirty tree plus a dirty tree plus a dirty tree. Okay. So before I hired him, I had to test him one more time. I said, make it 100, you're hired. So he looked at me, took the chalk, put a little dot under each of the trees. He goes, Nick, there's 100. I said, how is that 100? He goes, well, Nick, there was this a bigger dog. And it's a bigger dog coming and take a bigger turd under each of the trees. So you got dirty tree and a turd, a dirty tree and a turd, a dirty tree and a turd. Okay? So we hired the engineer. I want to make a point here. It's a damn good joke. But the point is, all of you kind of visualized it, and all of you will remember that joke. And all of you will screw it up tonight when you tell somebody else. Okay? But my point is telling a story really sinks it home. Okay? So everybody in this room has knowledge. Everyone in this room has experiences. Every one of you have dealt with a transformer that had a unique problem. Share that knowledge. Go back and share that with somebody. Okay? Back to tech. Tom Prevo told me it was okay to tell that joke. So, anyway. All right, let's go on. 7th, I got about 5-7 minutes here to finish up. The 7th strategy is using technology. Typically viewed, when we talk about technology, people think IT departments run that. In reality, technology enables and facilitates the sharing of knowledge. Okay? We call these collaboration-based technologies things like wikis and portals and video teleconferencing. But there's ways of using technology to help capture that knowledge. We're seeing increases in cameras, video recording, human motion capture, right? Tools range. Some of the utilities don't spend any money on this. And other utilities are spending over $2 million on this. And one of the programs I thought was great was a program known as Knowledge Keepers. Okay? And I'm not plugging them, but www.knowledgekeepers.com. They're putting GoPro cameras on their technicians. And they're working on low tap changers, and they're talking themselves through how to change out contacts. They're wearing these cameras and they're doing procedural things, and they're recording that information and storing it in a database. What a great way to capture both physically, right, the thoughts of the person doing it. When you change a contact, look for this, do this. So they're thinking out loud and capturing that information. So when this was brought up to several utilities, other utilities thought that that was a great idea. Knowledge risk assessments. Alvain's organization did this. TVA has done it. Duke has done it. It was formally implemented at 2 of the 7 utilities. Again, it addresses that question, what if? What if this person didn't come back? What if this person retires? What information is out there? What information do we need to gather? Okay? And some of these are scheduled on an annual or semi-annual basis. But it is important to take a look at the knowledge that you have in your organization and where is it at risk of walking out the door. Second to last year, exit interviews. Underutilized strategy, usually informally done. The retirements of lost personnel are not often known in advance, so it can be a challenging thing to do. Again, typically need more time to do this. Typically, it involves a project wrap-up. So when that person's leaving, you meet with them, maybe a technical group will meet with them to make sure that the existing work that's in progress gets finished. Right? And when implemented, they're unfortunately conducted by HR and focus on HR-related topics. Why are you leaving? Right? Was your manager good? Right? What's bad? And the other thing is, how can we get a hold of you? Right? But also the question is, are you interested in becoming a consultant? It's asked quite often. Just a quick show of hands, how many in the room are consultants? How many of you consult for the company you used to work for? A couple of you? Well, that goes to the last one. Rehiring of retirees as consultants. Okay? The literature showed that organizations typically do 3 things when someone retires. They do nothing. They freak out and try to collect all the information and data at the end. Or they hire them back as a consultant. Right? Again, we gotta look at that organizational citizenship behavior. Is that person, are those retirees willing to give back their knowledge? Are they willing to share it? Stay on with the corporation and help the organization? One of them is legal legacy. They talked about this earlier, but the idea of this is, again, this goes on a continuum. Some people will leave the organization and say, I'm done. Everything I've done for the company, I'm done. Don't contact me, I'm playing golf. At the other end, people feel like I've done all this work, and I'm about to leave, and who's going to keep it going? Right? You got to harness that. You got to find out where that person is and find out what it would take to keep that engineer involved, to transfer that knowledge and keep them on. Sometimes leaving a legacy. Let them know that leaving that information with the company, that they're leaving a legacy, they're leaving something positive for that organization to move forward. Utilities also let me know that they were giving employees tricks. They were giving them incentive bonuses. They were giving them things because they were panicking and they needed that information to stay. Okay? But I will say that it's really being used as a stopgap strategy. Because when they do hire the consultant back for 1.5 years as a consultant, sometimes they get paid what they were getting paid, even a little bit more, because now they're an independent contractor, they're 1099, right? They're getting paid pretty well. That 1.5 years they're back, they don't spend that time capturing their knowledge. They're using it to just keep that work going. Okay? So, for those organizations that hire people back, try to implement some of these other programs. Think of it as an extended period for offboarding. You can start capturing that knowledge of that person. Otherwise, again, it's a stopgap. So kind of in summary here, got a couple things. TKCS, Tacit Knowledge Capture Strategies. You need to implement these before your employees leave, okay? Transferring of this knowledge occurs best face-to-face. Get your people talking to each other, okay? The leveraging of resources, you need to focus on the intellectual assets. You need to focus more on knowledge. You need to align it with your business strategy. So if your strategy is based on you being an expert in the field, make sure that your programs are set up to capture and to maintain that knowledge. Because your business could be hurt if you lose the knowledge that your business strategy is based on. Programs need to address both explicit and tacit knowledge. They're more successful when they're embedded. What I don't expect is anybody to leave this meeting, pull this up on the internet or on the IEEE website, and start implementing all these programs. Because you're going to focus on it, you're going to put all this thing in it, and then you're going to go back to your work. Right? Most of you don't have workforce planning departments to implement all of this. What I will tell you is that you spend a little bit of time and implement some of it. Embed it into your operations. Require your employees to tell stories. Require them to do formal training. Require your senior engineers to participate in the training. Right? Look at the people that are retiring and start thinking about capturing that knowledge. Because if you implement any or all of these, you're going to gain some value. And you're going to help ensure operational continuity. So what's in it for you guys? One, electrical personnel. We're trying to set up and bring attention to this to place more value on you as individuals and that value of that information that you have. For management, they need these strategies to help maintain operational continuity. They need to keep running. And for the industry, look, we got to keep the lights on, right? So the question I'll leave you with is, what are you doing in your organization? Are you doing this? Are you at risk? All right? So I'll leave you with any questions. One note, my dissertation, if you're ever sitting on the toilet and you want to read something, it's 250 pages. I summarized it in about 40 minutes. I had 147 articles involved in it, a lot of research. I found it pretty interesting. I appreciate you guys listening. Tom, thank you for letting us come up and do it. I do want to say, I'm appreciative of how many you guys are up looking at me while I present. So I appreciate that, I really do. It's a good topic. Questions?
Presentation about people coming toward retirement and the concept that move another person alongside. That actually used to happen when I was a young engineer, but the experience I've had working mostly for manufacturers is that you give them some indication that you're about to leave and they escort you to the door. So it's not too, I mean, the advice is great, but this group would be preaching to the choir. You need to talk to the general managers and higher ups in the corporations. That's my thoughts. But of course, I never asked the young ladies either.
Fred.
My personal remark, it's always a great pleasure to have the mentee exceed the mentor in some presentation.
Nice.
One thing that really intrigued me, and I wondered how this is utilized, was the idea of having dual camera and showing the operation. What I would do in that situation, there's obviously 5 or 6 people that repair LDCs. I would have each of those do that, and then have a meeting where they're all sitting there and make sure there's a consensus opinion rather than just automatically choose one video or another. Another vehicle that I think would be useful, I don't know if it was not totally mentioned, but in any organization that's large, you're going to have 5 or 6 people that do similar tasks. And I think it would be very important to have regular meetings of these 5 or 6 people and come up with consensus on any of the tasks that they do, rather than, take this person and say, oh, well, that's going to be the model. I want to see it be a consensus model for everyone that's engaged in that activity.
And I'm sure those utilities that are implementing knowledge keepers do that. And one of the issues that came up when I brought this topic up was, I don't want to be taped, because what if I should do it wrong? Right? So I mean, there's issues with it, but again, it's using those tools to help capture more than the documented words.
This needs to
We
be
have time for one last
question.
Right, we can go through from SCE. So first of all, thank you very much for this discussion. This is definitely something that the industry really needs to push very, very hard. In fact, in my organization, this is one of my major top priorities in the organization. And so it helps to reaffirm that we're on the right path. One of the questions I have is around technology. You mentioned about the technology, because I realize this sort of one-on-one mentorship is really not very scalable. We can't do this fast enough. There's not enough of the senior experienced engineer to mentor some of the younger folks. So we are looking at utilizing technology. Do you have any sort of technology that you come across in your research that you could share? One example I can think of is sort of this YouTube vignette key knowledge base. Let's say if we have a mentoring session, a senior engineer that's been around for decades that's mentoring a young engineer, how do we capture this so that could be broadcast and it's much more scalable rather than just that 50 minutes of discussion? Capture those knowledge and store it somehow that could be very easily retrievable, say a year later by others. Do you have any thoughts or technology that you come across?
Well, one of the things that we do at Wyman, for example, is every webinar that we give, we record. So we have those, Mike Lau has 15 different presentations, we record them. So that as you've given that, you're hearing them in addition to just seeing it. So that's something we do at Wyman. So, but unfortunately.
That's exactly what we do as well. We have engineering brown bag sessions that's been recorded, and we have collection over the course of the past 4 or 5 years. The wealth of knowledge base that I'm interested in seeing how we can deploy this much more quickly, much more broader scale. So maybe we can exchange some notes later. Thank you.
Okay, sorry for going over. We need to sign.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very, very much.